Hello everybody, we are here to talk about Shang-Chi today. So I saw this last night in the theater. There were quite a few people there, so I wasn't able to take any notes. So I'm going to do my best to remember my thoughts. I did have a very long conversation about this movie with my brother afterwards, who I saw the movie with. But that was last night, and I got home at 4 a.m. this morning. So my quick spoiler-free thoughts are that it's not a superhero movie. And I'm not saying that as a positive or a negative. I'm just saying most of the stuff in the MCU are superhero movies, and this is not. So it's very, very different. I will say there was about 30-ish minutes of this, maybe 20-ish minutes of this that I really liked. About 30-ish minutes of it that I disliked. And the rest I thought was meh, was fine. I am not anticipating watching this again, but I know at some point I will because it's going to lead into something else, and I'm not dreading the fact that I will watch this again. I'm just not excited to do it. So I'm pretty lukewarm on this. I will get into a lot of nitpicks, and it's going to sound like I hated it, and I didn't. But I just thought it was bleh, which, to me, as someone who is such a huge fan of Marvel and of the MCU, like that's pretty low, because I tend to be excited about those things. So when something is boring, not really boring, but just uninteresting, that's pretty low on my totem pole. So I will leave it there for my spoiler-free thoughts, and I will get into the spoilers. So spoilers are ahead. Moving on. I would say my two biggest issues with this, one, as I already mentioned, it's not a superhero movie. I like superhero movies. And I understand that there are comic book movies, some of which are superhero movies and some of which are not. And there are superhero movies, some of which are comic book movies and some of which are not. I like superhero comic book movies. That's what I like. This is not a superhero movie. Plot-wise, this is much more similar to like a G.I. Joe movie mixed with Raya and the Last Dragon. And I'm not saying that as a dig or as an insult, but that's what this is. It's not a superhero movie. Shang-Chi is not a superhero in this movie. There's no supervillain. There's the bad guy. There's the villain. He has supernatural powers, but he's not a traditional supervillain. So I kept waiting for the superhero movie to start, and it did in the post-credits scene. So I'm very excited to see what Shang-Chi is going to do in a superhero movie, but this was not a superhero movie, so I didn't really enjoy this. My second big problem with this is the title. The title is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. You would think that with a title like that, the focus of the movie would be on Shang-Chi, and most of the plot would revolve around the Legend of the Ten Rings. Neither of those things are the case. If we're going to talk about characters, the story is much more interested in his father, who is the Mandarin but doesn't really call himself that. The humor is 100% dependent on Awkwafina, who I didn't dislike, but she reminded me of Darcy. Her character reminded me of Darcy from the Thor movies, which I cannot stand. So even though she's not that bad, she reminds me of her, which just puts a bad taste in my mouth. The emotion of the movie comes from his mother and his aunt, and extra conflict that we have to put in because this movie doesn't have enough of a story to last a whole movie comes from his sister. So he's the central character, but he's not really the main character. The movie is more about his dad and his mom and his sister, and he and his friend are there also. So having him be the I told my brother, it's like if the Guardians of the Galaxy was called Peter Quill. He's a main character in that movie, but there's a lot more to that movie. And if someone was just expecting to see a Peter Quill movie, they might be disappointed. But when we go in expecting a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, it does a good job at that. So this should have been called something different. I'm not totally sure what, but it should not have been called Shang-Chi. And as for The Legend of the Ten Rings, the Ten Rings play a big part in, like, how things are happening in this movie, but not why things are happening in this movie. And you would think, when this organization has been built up over 3 Iron Man movies and one-shots and other things like Ant-Man, that, like, this is where they're going to, like, explain it, right? And we get this intro, this very long narrated intro. But during that intro, it's the mother who's narrating. She says something like, some people say he found them in a cave, or some people say that they found them buried at the bottom of the blah, 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 blah. And then she just moves on. So we don't know what the rings are. We don't know where they come from. And the post-credits scene is about the rings. And they're trying to determine if they're alien, or if they're magic, or where they come from. So it seems like they're still going to do that story, but that's not what this was. So why call the movie that? So those are my 2 biggest problems. It's not a superhero movie, and the title was wrong. So if it had been called something else, and it wasn't marketed as a superhero movie, I might have enjoyed it more. But also, a lot of it is just fight scenes. And I've seen fight scenes before, and most of the fight scenes aren't that good or interesting. That's not to say that they're bad. They're just not that good or interesting. So, this movie was not for me. Now, I told you that there were some things that I liked and some things that I disliked. So I want to get into the things that I liked first, because I did like parts of this movie. And then I'll go through the things that I didn't like, and then I will ramble about nitpicks as long as I can think of. So, there were 2 fight scenes in this movie that I did really enjoy because I thought they were interesting. One of them is the fight scene on the side of a building, and there's this, like, bamboo scaffolding all around it. And so the tension of, like, they can't fall off or move too far to the side or else they're going to fall off this thing, that kept me engaged. That kept me interested. And even though I'm not concerned for Shang-Chi in that moment, because he's not going to die, right? Awkwafina, I think her name is Katie in the movie, she gets into some other trouble, and I don't know how much she's in the movie, right? I didn't realize that she was going to be a huge player in the final fight. So there's some tension with her that actually worked, I think, at least on the first watch. So that scene I really liked. I thought that was an interesting fight scene that was different than stuff that I've seen before. Then the other fight scene that I liked, towards the end of the movie, Shang-Chi fights his father. His father is using the 10 rings, and Shang-Chi is using this, like, dragon scale staff thing. And so seeing the clash of the staff and these rings, I thought that was just visually interesting. They fight later on where they're both using rings. That's kind of boring. And then all the other fights I find kind of boring. But that fight in particular with those weapons, I thought was interesting. So that's the stuff that I liked. Were those 2, well, one scene and then one piece of a much, much larger scene. The things that I disliked. As I mentioned before, there's a very long introduction. I don't know exactly how long it lasts. It felt like 20 or 30 minutes. It lasts a really long time, and it's all taking place in the past, and it's telling a story, and blah, blah, blah. And then we finally, move forward. But then later on in the movie, we keep flashing back. And it's not like a Man of Steel style flashback, where we see the flashbacks as they're relevant to the point in the story. We could have seen all of it at once, preferably shorter, and then moved on, and it would have been fine. But throughout the movie, we find out that their mother died, and that was this big thing, and the father became cold after that, and so the kids felt alone, and blah, blah, blah. And we know that, and we learn that, and we're told that, and we see the effects of that, and we understand. And then, after all of that, we go back and we see the flashback scene of when she died. Why would we see that after? We already know everything we need to know. We understand what we need to understand from that. So at this point, seeing that doesn't really do anything. If they had shown that first, and then built upon that, and we learn how that affects them, that would have made sense. It wouldn't have been necessary, but it would have made sense. But, like, going back and seeing something, it doesn't reveal anything. There's a little thing later, if you've seen the movie, there's a little thing later where Shang-Chi's father kind of blames Shang-Chi for allowing his mother to die, but that doesn't go anywhere. When he first brings that up, I'm like, oh, this is like why he's so cold, because he blames him, and like this is going to be a big thing now. But after that one line, it's done. It's never referenced again. So it could have gone somewhere, but it didn't. So they could have either put it earlier, and it would have made everything else that we learn after that more visceral. I don't know if that's the right word I'm looking for, but it would have helped with that process. Or it could have been a reveal that sets up this conflict that drives the climax of the movie. But it doesn't do either of those things. It's done after we learn all the information, and it doesn't drive anything new. So it's very, very odd. So that was the biggest thing that I disliked. And then there's this other universe that they go to through a portal that's filled with all these magical creatures, and they just look bad. They look like Lion King almost, but they're not real creatures, so your brain doesn't want to accept them as real, and so it just doesn't work. And there's some other effects shots in this movie that just look bad. The scene on the bus, the big fight scene on the bus, like the compositing with the street below, when it's showing from the top, or the buildings behind when it's showing from the side, it just looks bad. And I'm like, usually the excuse when effects look bad are that they didn't have enough time, but they had extra time on this movie. Why didn't they make the effects look better? And then there's other parts that look really, really good. That fight scene on the building, that looks good. Maybe it's because that's at night, so it's harder to see stuff. I don't know. I think most of the background and the scenery stuff in this other magical universe looks good, but the creatures don't. But the dragon, I think, does look pretty good for the most part, but that might just be because it moves around really fast. We don't get much slow, still shots of the whole thing. We just get pieces at a time. So it's very weird, because some effects look really good, some effects look really bad. The fight scenes, like I said, there are those two fight scenes that I think are really, really good, and then there are other fight scenes that are horrible. And I'm just like, clearly they have competent fight choreographers on this movie. Is it that some of the actors just couldn't sell it? I don't know. So during the very, very long intro, Shang-Chi's father meets his mother, who's like a gatekeeper or something for this magical portal to another world. And they have this fight because he wants to get in and she needs to stop him. And it's very, very, very obviously one of those like, oh, the fighting, it's almost like dancing and blah, blah, blah. But that's because the fighting is bad, right? So it's just this clearly choreographed movements between them, but neither of them seem like they're trying to hurt each other, which story-wise, they absolutely are. And then we see this fight that's a horribly shot fight, and then we're just told that they fall in love. We're never told why. I can understand from a certain point of view why he falls in love with her, because his whole thing is that he wants power. He wants more power, more power, more power. And she is more powerful than him. So from a certain point, I can see that he wants to conquer her in some way to show that he's, got the power or whatever. So I can understand that. There's absolutely no reason given for why Shang-Chi's mother falls in love with his father. He's a horrible guy up to that point. He's a warlord that just kills people that get in his way. And literally in the narration, she says he's the last person I ever expected to fall for. But they never say why she fell for him. We never know what he did to change her mind or to win her over or just to get a spark. Literally, all we see is this horrible fight. And then it's like, and then we had babies. And it makes no sense. And their relationship, not Shang-Chi, their relationship is what drives this movie. Because he thinks that her soul is trapped somewhere and he's going to go set it free and blah, 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 blah. But why did they get together? We don't know. That should have been the movie. That should have been a Mandarin movie. It should have been a movie about his father and the 10 rings. And you could have had some small amount of Shang-Chi stuff and then do a separate Shang-Chi movie focused on Shang-Chi. But this movie is not. It cares much more about his parents. So it's so frustrating to me when so much of a movie is dependent on something that we are not presented with in any way. We don't see it. We're not told about it. Nothing is implied that can help us understand it. We're just told, yeah, that happened, and we're supposed to accept it. I can't get invested in a story like that. I have to know how and why these things happen if I'm going to care about the story. So I was talking about fight scenes. The worst part is, not the worst part, but like what makes it worse is later on, when Shang-Chi is in this magical world, he's having a conversation with his aunt, who knows the same magical fighting techniques that his mother did, and he's like, show me how to do this. And they are clearly not trying to hurt each other, story-wise, but that fight looks really good, and they look like they're actually fighting, and the effects are cool. So they're capable of doing that. They're capable of choreographing, They're capable of choreographing a good-looking magic fight, and they're capable of having good-looking effects in that fight. For this later scene that doesn't actually matter that much in the overall plot. But in this beginning scene that's setting up the whole movie, that drives the whole plot, it looks horrible. It bothered me. So those are my main active dislikes. I had a lot of nitpicks. I'm not going to sit here and think to myself and try to remember all of them. One of them is that the sister uses rope darts. And the rope darts in this movie are very much like Wonder Woman's lasso and Wonder Woman 1984. Meaning that they don't behave like rope darts, just like the lasso didn't behave like her lasso. The finite amount of rope that she has, no, it's not real. It's infinite. She can throw them as far as she wants. And, the fact that you have to actually pull rope darts back, no, these just, automatically come back like Thor's hammer or something. Rope darts are cool because of the skills needed to use them. But the character, the actor, what we see, they don't have those skills. It's magic rope darts. And literally at the end of the movie, they might actually be magic rope darts. But she uses rope darts throughout the movie, which are not magical. So it's just lazy. They were just lazy. Speaking of the sister, someone's gonna get mad at me for this. During the massive amount of flashbacks that we see Shang-Chi getting his training from a very young age. And his sister doesn't get to do any training, because girls don't train, only boys train, right? But she, watches them, and we see her, doing her own training in secret, right? That's all fine. I'm good with all of that. That all makes sense. But then later on, she fights Shang-Chi, and she beats him, which, again, I'm fine with. But then she's having a conversation with Awkwafina, and she's like, I wasn't allowed to train, but I watched everything that they did, and then I taught myself how to do it better. And I'm like, that's not how learning works. If you don't have someone actively teaching you and telling you the mistakes that you're making and what you can do better, you can't just teach yourself how to do it better. That's not how learning works. And it feels very much like something that they shoved in as girl power, especially with the final end credit scene where she's the Mandarin now, but with girls. Is that what's going on? I don't know. And it's just so weird. And I guess you could say that maybe that's what she thinks, and it's not accurate, because the only person we really see her fight is Shang-Chi, because she still loses to her father in one throw. So maybe it shouldn't bother me as much as it did, but I'm just like, I'm a teacher. I'm like, that's not how teaching works. That's not how learning works. You can't watch someone teach someone else, and just from that, teach yourself better. If you want to do girl power, I'm all for that, but make it make sense, right? Have her say that she sought out other training, or, give her a process for getting there, not just, oh, I just did it better because I'm a girl. I did it better. I can't think of any other big nitpicks at this moment. But my brother and I talked for hours about this movie. So I know there's a lot more, but I don't, I'm not Nando and DJ Diggins. I don't want to go into every single little nitpick. It's just when the movie's not good, nitpicks bother me more. If a movie is better, I'm more forgiving of it. This one I did not think was very good, and I did not enjoy it. So they stick with me a little bit more. Trevor Slattery is in this. Completely forgot about that. And it's weird because they made Iron Man 3. People got mad. So then they made All Hail the King. And they undid a lot of Iron Man 3. They were like, no, this is what was happening now, right? Well, then this movie undoes All Hail the King. Because in All Hail the King, the Mandarin is furious at Trevor Slattery and wants to execute him. And we find out in this movie, they were going to... But, then I did some acting, and they were like, oh, let's keep this guy alive. He's not a good actor! Why in the world would that change his mind? Why would that change the Mandarin's mind about executing him? He's not a good actor. He's not funny. He's funny to an audience because of how stupid he is, but you wouldn't want him around as entertainment. So, I don't know. It makes no sense. The only purpose he serves in terms of the story is that he's translating what this magical creature is saying to everyone else so that they can get to the portal. But you could just have the magical creature able to communicate with those people. He doesn't need to be there. He doesn't serve any function. Someone was like, hey, we should get Ben Kingsley in this to do Trevor Slattery again. Like, dude... do people like Trevor Slattery? Like, I get he had a couple laughs because of how stupid he was, but does that mean we like him as a character? And B, if not, because I don't think most people do, does Marvel think that people do? Do they think that this is someone like, Chris Evans or Sebastian Stan, where they just want to stick him in movies that he's not a part of, just so that people can be like, oh, it's that guy? It's so weird. It's so out of place. It doesn't serve any purpose. It doesn't need to serve any purpose. So there's just a lot. There's just a lot of things. Abomination is in this, and he looks worse than he did in The Incredible Hulk, which was 13 years ago. How does he look worse in the 30 seconds he's on screen than the several minutes that he's on screen in a movie from 13 years ago? I don't understand. I do like Wong in this. Like I said, I like the end credit scene, or the mid-credit scene, where we got Wong and Captain Marvel, who makes sense that she's there because they're wondering if they're alien. The rings are alien, and she's got a lot of experience with alien technology. Why is Bruce Banner there? His one contribution to the conversation is, well, they're not vibranium. How would he know that? He's not an expert on vibranium. If that's the takeaway we're supposed to get, that should have been Shuri. And Shuri is smarter than Bruce Banner in terms of stuff like this, so she would have made more sense anyway. Why do we keep randomly sticking Mark Ruffalo at the end of movies tangentially related to the Mandarin? Because he was at the end of Iron Man 3, now he's at the end of this. And he serves no function in either one. Why are we doing this? If you're going to have cameos at the end, have them make sense. When Wong is talking to someone off screen, I thought it was going to be Doctor Strange. No, it's Captain Marvel, which again, makes sense because she says it's not like any alien tech that I've ever seen. She has experience in that area. Bruce is not an expert on vibranium. Bruce has not spent a ton of time in Wakanda studying vibranium. Why is he there talking about vibranium? Why isn't it Shuri or Sebastian Stan? Bucky spent time in Wakanda. He could be there. He's got a vibranium arm. He would know how it works and how it lets it, right? I didn't like this movie. I liked 2 scenes from it. I like the character. I say that not really knowing who the character is. Shang-Chi has no personality in this. We don't know what he likes. We don't know what kind of guy he is. We see him out with Awkwafina having drinks and doing karaoke. That's it. That's the extent of his personality. We don't really know like what his core beliefs are, what his morals are, because we're told different versions from him throughout the movie. And it's never really resolved. So he's enough of a blank slate that I can imagine a version of him that I like. And I'm excited to see him do things in the future. I really wish I had any idea how the power rings work at all, because it's absolutely not explained in any way how they work or what they do or how they function. We're just supposed to try and follow it on screen. And it's one of those things that in the moment you see it and you're like, okay. But then you're like, could they do this? Could they do that? I have no idea, right? They clearly change size because they shift over your hand when you're putting them off and on. So I'm like, could you put one around a guy and bind him in it? I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. Could you change their shape? We've seen them kind of morph into a sphere, but it's just the rings falling around. But if they can change their size, can you change their shape? Could you make a shield out of one? Could you make a spear out of one, right? I have no idea, because we are not told anything about where they came from or how they work. Yet the movie is titled after them. There's also a big dragon versus dragon fight at the end. Those I thought were some of the better looking creatures. But I'm like, I thought this was supposed to be about Shang-Chi. Why are we watching Ryan the Last Dragon right now? Why are we watching dragons fighting? I don't know. I've never seen The Neverending Story, but I'm familiar with the shot of the kids riding on the back of the dragon. That's what most of the third act of this movie is Shang-Chi and his sister just riding around on a dragon. And then, like, the dragon, the good dragon, makes, like, weird water dragons that I'm pretty sure are just avatars of the main dragon. I don't think they're separate creatures, but none of it is ever explained or talked about. So all I can do is guess. Awkwafina gets the final kill shot at the end, because of course she does. She, is completely, I don't want to say completely incompetent, but of everybody there, she's the most incompetent at war. But of course, she gets the final kill shot on her first try, because good. Didn't like this movie very much. I'm excited to see Shang-Chi in a better movie in the future. I fully understand that I will have to watch this again at some point, and I'm not dreading doing it. It's fine, but fine is pretty low when it comes to an MCU movie for me. So, those are my thoughts. Please let me know your thoughts down below, but that's everything that I've got to say about this movie. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.